The Autism Research Institute relies on the generosity of donors like you to make this webcast possible. If you enjoy this presentation, please consider making a donation. Thank you.
Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Dr. Lauren Moskowitz is an assistant professor of psychology at St. John's University. She received her BS from Cornell University and her MA and PhD in clinical psychology from Stony Brook University. She completed her internship at NYU Child Study Center and Bellevue Hospital and her postdoctoral fellowship at NYU Child Study Center. Her research focuses on behavioral assessment and intervention for children with autism spectrum disorders and other developmental disabilities. So this mom has a son who's only 18 months old, but she's starting to see lip biting and some hair pulling and other problems that she hadn't expected this young. And so she was wondering about strategies she can use starting at this young an age.
Sure. I don't know, just quickly, were participants directed to watch the previous talk that I gave or no?
Yes, we included that link in the reminder.
Great.
Yep.
But for those who didn't watch it, I feel like I should just give a brief summary of function, just because that's what's going to guide my answers to most things, right? But basically, you know, I wish that it were the treating self-injury or treating any challenging behavior were kind of as easy as do this or do that, right? What usually we suggest to people to do is based on an assessment about why that person might be doing it and what they might be getting out of it, if that makes sense. So usually the thought behind self-injury used to be that it was served as kind of sensory function or purpose, that people did things like you said, bite their lip or pull their hair because it gave them sensory input. Does that make sense? And that can be the case. But what we know from years of a lot of research is that there also can be other reasons why self-injury is occurring. There can be multiple reasons, but it certainly can also be from attention. One reason could be attention from parents or teachers or caregivers. Another reason could be to escape certain demands or escape certain situations that are difficult for them, right? So to give you an example of what I mean by that, one child I worked with, when I came to meet him, his father said, "Oh, say hi to Lauren," you know, and he bit his hand. And as soon as he bit his hand, his dad said, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry, we'll leave you alone," and we walked away, right? So based on that brief example, hopefully you could see what I mean is the function of this kid's behavior was to escape interacting with me, right? Or his dad or anyone, right? He learned pretty quickly, every time I bite my hand, I don't have to interact with anyone. People leave me alone. Does that make sense? So the way we would treat that kid's behavior is pretty different from how we would treat a kid's behavior that had, let's say, the opposite function, to maybe get attention from a caregiver. Then I've worked with other kids who every single time they bite themselves or bite their lip or pull their hair, you know, their parent or teacher or somebody says, you know, "Bobby, stop doing that. Bobby, why are you doing that? Are you okay, Bobby?" Or whatever it is, gives them some form of attention. So the kid then learns pretty quickly, hey, every time I bite myself or hit myself or slap myself, someone talks to me, someone looks at me, someone pays me attention. So we would treat that kid's behavior pretty differently than a kid who was trying to, for example, escape social interaction, or a kid who was pulling their hair or biting their lip to get some sort of sensory input or escape, let's say, pain or reduce some sort of sensory stimulation. Does that make sense? So I don't know, before I go any further, I don't know if you can ask that person who wrote in a follow-up question about if they have any idea, and it's hard to know without a thorough assessment, but just if they have any initial idea of why they think their child might be engaging in that behavior. And the way you can know that is what usually happens right after. So after their kid, you know, after this 18-month-old bites his lip or pulls his hair, what usually happens right after that? Does mom tell him to stop doing that? Do people leave him alone? Do they give him something, a pacifier, a soothing toy, a comfort blanket? What usually happens right after that? I don't know if they're able to answer that question or not.
Yeah, she actually did mention that she feels like he picked up the behavior after he observed other students doing it at school, that it was an effective attention seeking. So have you seen that where they sort of learn it, where they observe it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So like I said, and things can serve a lot of different purposes, right? Like sometimes things can start out as sensory, for example, like a kid just starts doing it because it feels good to them, right? But then when, let's say, a parent or a teacher maybe says, stop doing that, don't do that. I'm thinking of myself because I bite my nails, which I shouldn't. I wish I didn't. But since I was a kid, I always bit my nails. But as soon as I would bite my nails, my mom or someone would be like, stop doing that, don't bite your nails. So things can then start to serve a secondary function of attention over time, even if maybe it didn't start out that way. So for this kid, there could be more than one thing. Attention from his teachers or parents or classmates could certainly be one function. There could also be another function in terms of it feeling good. But sometimes I have seen kids certainly start imitating other people doing those behaviors, and then they realize, hey, this works for me. This gets me out of something, or this gets me attention, or something like that, right? But for this kid, assuming the function is to get attention. What has worked in tons of intervention research and in my clinical practice is teaching this kid an alternative way to get that same need met, right? We call this functional communication training. So teaching that child, I don't know, does it mention if this child has any verbal language or not? He's only 18 months, I know. But did he have any?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
No, she didn't mention that.
Sure. So, for example, teaching this kid to say, assuming he has verbal language, teaching him to say something like, one of the first studies on functional communication training, the first study on it, they taught children who were engaging in aggression or self-injury who wanted attention from teachers to say, am I doing good work? Instead of hitting themselves or hitting other people to get that same attention, right? So am I doing good work is a kind of complicated sentence for an 18-month-old, but something similar, such as hi or hello or play with me or look at me. For kids who cannot speak, who have no language, you can teach them to tap someone and sign that, or just tap a person when they want attention. Or you can teach them to use augmentative communication devices. A lot of the kids we work with, I'm sure, have things like, chat PCs or Dynavoxes or Proloquo2Go, where they can press a picture and it'll say, play with me or look at me or something to that effect. If that's too complicated, which for an 18-month-old it might be, there's also things like micro switches you can buy online, like buttons, basically, right? Where on the button, you can record a voice or sayings. You can record hug me or play with me or look at me and put a picture of someone hugging you or playing with you or doing something. And then so you teach the child to, again, press that and get attention. So that the idea behind that is you're trying to teach the child to replace what they're doing, pulling their hair or biting their lip, with pressing that button and then giving them attention in response to that, if that makes sense. And obviously that requires a lot of prompting. The kid's just not going to do it on his own at first, but the more you kind of figure out what situations is he doing that in, right? Like probably he's not pulling his hair or biting his lip all day long. It might feel like it, but there's probably certain situations in which he's more likely to do that. So, for example, I'm thinking of a family I recently worked with. The kid was more likely to do it whenever the mom would pay attention to the siblings, whenever the siblings came in to show the mom something, right? And that makes sense because the kid then doesn't have the mom's attention anymore. The mom's paying attention to the siblings. And teachers have noticed similar patterns sometimes. And again, there could be a variety of different situations. I'm just using this as an example. But I'm thinking of a teacher where the child was more likely to self-injure whenever the speech pathologist came into the classroom, the teacher would talk to the speech pathologist, or so again, remove their attention, right? Or whenever the teacher would be paying attention to other kids. So again, if you can isolate the situations in which your child's more likely to do that, that's when you would want to prompt them. So again, I'm making huge leaps here. I don't know that the purpose of this child's self-injury is for attention, but assuming it is, for example, what you could do is, again, figure out the situations in which he's most likely to bite his lip, for example, or pull his hair. And let's say that's for mom when she's on the phone. So as soon as you have a phone call, or you can even practice pretending to have phone calls, that's when you want to bring out that button, for example, or teach him to tap you, or teach him to do something to then ask for your attention and reward him immediately with your attention every single time he does that. And when he is reliably asking for your attention and you don't see any more of that self-injury for a week or two, that's when you can start then fading that out. and not paying attention to him immediately every time he asks it. That's when you could say, okay, I see you're asking me to play with you. Wait one more minute. Maybe the next day, okay, wait 2 more minutes, wait 3 more minutes, and setting a timer and gradually kind of trying to build up his tolerance of maybe waiting for your attention. But that would just be, again, one example of kind of intervention you could use depending on what the purpose or function is.
All right. Thanks for all that information. I think for the young kids, that's particularly helpful if you can get that in place early. So here's a question from a parent who's seen a big spike, a massive spike recently, both in intensity and frequency. Now, this is I know you work with a pediatric audience, but this is a young adult. But they're just trying to figure it out. It sounds like they're pretty familiar with the idea of functional analysis. They know that anxiety had been a part of it in the past, but they're trying to get to the bottom of why you would see a sudden spike like that. So have you seen spikes?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, things, because, and Steve obviously does a lot of work on this. Obviously there's a lot of biological factors and things going inside that can cause self-injury to increase or decrease, right? Often it could be very related to pain. It could be something is, I don't know if this family has gotten a medical workup, but I would suggest doing so, because if you see a very sudden increase, there could be something hurting this child, right? Or adult, I'm sorry. My late advisor, an example that always stands out in my mind is an individual in the hospital he was working with who would bang his head very severely into a wall to the point where it would bleed. And they did a lot of functional assessments, and they could not figure out why he was doing that. And it turned out, I forget how they were able to figure this out, but it turned out eventually they were able to figure out that this individual suffered from migraines, right? Which makes sense, because I know when my head's hurting, like, God, I just feel like bashing into a wall or doing something or hurting some other part of my body to distract or take away from that pain, right? So I think we see that often when people are in pain, right? Like think about if I'm getting a shot, for example, or blood test, like I'll squeeze my hand, like you almost cause pain to another part of you to distract yourself when you're feeling pain in another area of your body. So pain, illness is often a very common reason why one might see an increase in self-injury. Self-injury has also been shown to correlate with things like sleep. So maybe there's this disruption, a recent disruption in individual sleep. That's something I would look out for. Allergies, it's been shown to be related to ear infections, constipation, IBS, stomach pain. So these are all things that could be going on related to their diet, perhaps, or stomach pain, or, that could then cause some sort of rapid increase of injury. So again, I would kind of cue into if there's fluctuations in it, even on a daily basis. I think the best place to always start is taking data. Like, obviously go get a medical workup, but also start taking data. And this goes for anybody who's calling in. I take data on everything before I do anything, just to get a sense of what's going on. So taking data, and I think in my previous talk that you put a link to, Denise, I included what's called a scatter plot. So it's basically like where you can tally up the number of instances of problem behavior, whether that's aggression or self-injury, throughout the day. So you can start to look for patterns. So you might be able to see, okay, it actually happens more in the morning. Because let me tell you, it is, especially when you have kids, like, it is really kind of hard to see what's going on. Like, you're just so in it all the time. I see this myself with my kids, which is why I take data, that it's really hard to kind of figure out any patterns or what's going on until you sit back and look at the data and you realize, oh, okay, it seems like there's a spike in self-injury every night right after dinner, or it seems to be happening even more in the morning right after breakfast. Then you could kind of look at if there's any factors that are correlated with the time of day, or maybe it's right after meals, or maybe it's right after certain activities, or maybe there's a new caretaker in their life, so there's a spike in it because they are avoiding interaction with that new caretaker. I'm just making up some reasons why you could see a sudden spike, but you might not be aware of what those reasons are until you start to take data and you see when it's happening more or less, and the factors that are occurring around the time it's happening more can start to help you look for patterns. Does that make sense?
And on top of all that, I know a lot of families do experience that comorbid medical situation with their loved ones with autism. And we do have on our website Yeah, we have other webinars about that, and also a continuing medical education series that anybody can watch, where we talk about some of those different issues that come up, including seizures.
Yep. Yeah, and that's an excellent point, Denise. I mean, we do know that people with autism are much more likely to suffer from a variety of medical problems than people without autism, including sleep problems, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, reflux, a whole host of stomach problems for sure. But as you said, seizures, it's a lot more common to have other medical problems when you have autism, as well as other mental health problems such as anxiety, which could also lead to increased, spikes in self-injury.
Right. Okay, so you talked a little bit about working with kids who are nonverbal, and many parents are writing in and asking for some specific strategies or things you've seen that work well when you're facing that kind of challenge.
Well, certainly the most effective thing with people who are nonverbal is the example, I initially illustrated with the 18-month-old, is to give that individual a form of communication, right? Just imagine how hard it is, not to be able to communicate what you want or need. Self-injury works, it happens because it works. I know as a parent, even knowing what I know as a behavior analyst, if my child started biting themselves or hitting themselves, I'd probably give them whatever the heck they wanted just to make it stop, right? So kids learn pretty quickly when they engage in self-injury. They get their needs met really quickly, right? Whether that's, okay, I bite myself, I get food right away. I bite myself, I get attention right away. I bite myself, everyone leaves me alone right away, right? I bite myself, and or some sort of sensory input they feel. Again, it could be sensory, of course, as well. But so the whole point of functional communication training, again, this is especially an issue with nonverbal people, is you want to give that individual a way to get their needs or wants met. Maybe that's not through speech, and that's fine. But that's where the use of augmentative communication devices come in, or sign language, or like I said, even something like a simple micro switch where they press a button and it says something. What we know is we see remarkable decreases in self-injury and aggression, all types of problem behavior, when an individual has a way to communicate what they want or need, right? They resort to self-injury out of desperation because they don't know how else to get their wants and needs met, right? They don't know how else to say, hey, leave me alone. I don't want to talk to you right now, right? Or this is too hard for me. Or, hey, someone look at me, someone talk to me. So they learn pretty quickly, again, I bite myself or I hit myself, and this is what happens. So again, the most important thing you can do as a parent or teacher is to teach this individual an alternative way to get their needs or wants met, to teach them how to ask for what they need or want, which again could be as simple as pressing a button. For individuals who struggle with that, we've even had success with just teaching them to tap someone, right? So the kid I'm thinking of who would either pull his mom's hair or pull his own hair every time the mom would start paying attention to the siblings. So like, let's say the sister would come in and be like, Mom, watch me dance. And the mom would stop paying attention to the kid with autism, so he would pull mom's hair or pull his own hair. And that would get mom to look at him and rub his leg or talk to him. So again, what we had to do with this kid was just teach him to simply tap mom. And we did a lot of role playing. We're not pulling mom's hair, but just tapping her on the leg or tapping her on the arm would then result in mom looking at him and giving him attention. So he learned, okay, when I tap, I get this attention. But when I pull her hair or pull my own hair, she doesn't give me that attention, right? So again, that's easier said than done. But kids will certainly do what they know works. So the goal is to try to teach them, hey, communication is what works, but your self-injury doesn't work in getting what you want or need. Now, that said, that's the official kind of party line, that you're not supposed to reinforce self-injury because, again, you want to teach them it doesn't work. But again, I as a parent, even knowing that, I don't know if I could follow through with that. If my child was hitting themselves or biting themselves, it's very, very hard to simply pretend like that's not happening and not reinforce that. I get that. Fortunately, there is some research that suggests if we simply reinforce the communication behavior more than the self-injury. So it doesn't mean completely eliminating reinforcement for the self-injury, but if we can simply try to reinforce the communication even more than the self-injury, that alone could hopefully result in an increase in the communication and a decrease in the self-injury, if that makes sense. Okay, so the goal is, again, trying to teach this individual an alternative way to communicate and reinforcing that. Some other things you could do, and we talked, like I said, a lot about a function. That's probably the most important thing you could do, but some other things you could do, again, and this is all based on trying to conduct, like we said, a functional behavior assessment and try to figure out what is transpiring here. Why is this individual engaging in the self-injury, right? Is you could alter the antecedents. You could try to change the things that lead to the self-injury in the first place, right? So let's say you start taking data and you notice your kid starts to bite themselves closer to dinner time. And then you're like, oh my God, my kid's biting themselves. Let me quickly give them food, right? So what you would then want to do is either, proactively prompt him to ask for food, again, right before dinner, or if teaching him that communication skill is too hard for you for some reason, proactively giving him food as soon as you sit down, something to snack on while you're cooking dinner to avoid him self-injuring while you're cooking dinner, for example. So that's just like one example. Or let's say, again, you, as a teacher, notice your kid is more likely to self-injure when they're sitting next to a certain kid. You might want to move their seat so they're not sitting next to that kid, right? So all of this is predicated on taking data and trying to look at when it happens more frequently, and then trying to kind of just change those circumstances. That said, those tend to be more temporary solutions. So if let's say you notice your kid is injuring himself more when sitting next to another kid, it will certainly work if you move him from sitting next to the other kid. That's a great temporary solution. It's not the greatest long-term solution. The better long-term solution is then, again, kind of teaching them a way to communicate their wants and needs, right? But certainly we know that altering those situations can help a lot, removing what some of the triggers for self-injury are in some way. Just to kind of give, again, a more, and the same goes if there's more internal variables going on, right? So just to give, again, a more personal example of myself, for example, like I said, I bite my nails, which is probably a form of self-injury that the average person can relate to more. It's not characteristic of autism. It's something a lot of people do, certainly bite their nails. I wish I did not. It is disgusting, I recognize. But I do, and I could stop if I did a hardcore intervention, but I simply don't have the time or energy or motivation to do so, so I'm just living with it. But let's say I did want to stop, what I would, and prioritized it, what I would do is again, look at the circumstances in which I'm more likely to bite my nails, like I said, right? Now, a lot of people jump to the assumption right away, oh, I bite my nails because I'm anxious. I'm afraid, I'm anxious about something. And that could be true. That could very well be true. But the opposite could be true. Research shows that people can, again, engage in self-injury, such as biting their nails, when they are anxious, and it reduces their level of arousal. But the opposite can also be true. Sometimes when people are understimulated, under-aroused, the opposite of anxious, bored, they can engage in self-injury to bring up or increase their level of arousal, right? And sometimes it's both. So again, from doing a kind of careful assessment on myself, I notice that I am more likely to bite my nails when I am in a situation that makes me anxious, when I'm stressed out. Let's say if I'm taking a test, which thankfully I don't really have to do anymore, but it lets some sort of situation like that. But I'm also the opposite. I'm also more likely to bite my nails in a situation where I am understimulated, most commonly where I am stuck in traffic driving. I notice I'm sitting in the car, I'm not doing anything, and I'm stuck in traffic, right? I'm very commonly biting my nails in that situation. So again, if I wanted to alter that, what I could do is in those specific situations where it's more likely to give myself something that's incompatible with biting my nails. So I can make sure I'm chewing gum, for example, whenever I'm driving in the car, or have Band-Aids or mittens on my hands so that I can't bite my nails whenever I'm in the car. So again, the first step is sort of, again, really doing a thorough functional assessment and looking at what situations make the individuals more likely to engage in self-injury. Once you figure that out, how can we change those circumstances, right? Is there any way we can kind of remove those triggers or minimize them in some way? Or how can we teach the individual to get their needs met in a better way, ask for something else, ask for attention or ask to get out of something or ask for their food or their toy? Or how can we, if it's completely kind of sensory, like to increase levels of arousal or reduce levels of arousal, let's say, how can we do that in another way? So how can we help them increase their levels of arousal in another way, maybe exercising or jumping up and down? Or how can we help them decrease their levels of arousal in another way other than self-injury, such as deep breathing, or some sort of squeezing different muscles, or holding some sort of calming object? Is there some other thing we could do to decrease their level of arousal or anxiety? And then the other option that I just mentioned is trying to teach them behavior that is incompatible with that, right? So again, trying to teach the individual something to do where they can't self-injure at the same time as that. So like if you're biting your lip, I don't think you can be biting your lip and chewing gum at the same time, which again wouldn't be applicable for an 18-month-old, but maybe someone older. Or if you are engaging in finger biting in a certain situation, teaching that individual to draw in those given situations. You can't be biting your hand or drawing at the same time. So that's what we would call differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, trying to find a behavior. So you're either trying to find a behavior that's kind of functionally giving that individual that same need, helping them get that same need met, or a behavior that is incompatible with self-injury so that they can't do the self-injury and that behavior at the same time. Now, again, the reason why you really want to do a functional behavior assessment is because it's not like you could be prompting that individual to do the incompatible behavior all day long. Like someone can't be chewing gum the entire day long, which is why you really want to figure out those situations in which it's most likely to occur and then target those. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, okay. That's great. We have a bunch of questions. So the next question,
sure,
this is an interesting one. I don't think I've seen this one before. This mom's asking, before they're going all in for trying to replace the behavior with a verbal strategy, like I need help, or as sort of a bridge, they're teaching him to use like bite a washcloth or the neck of his shirt, so at least he's not hurting himself. And then they're working toward that next step. Is that, what do you think about that? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I think that is a reasonable goal. Like I was saying, you can certainly teach something that is physically incompatible, like I was just saying with the behavior, while you're working on teaching a communication strategy, which could be harder, of course, right? So like I was saying, the example I was just giving was chewing gum instead of biting my nails. But that's similar, I would think, to chewing jewelry, jewelry like you could buy for kids with autism, like they, where they chew on that instead. So teaching them to chew jewelry or chew their shirts or chew something else instead of biting themselves. Now, again, the issue with that is, of course, it could be stigmatizing. It doesn't necessarily, we don't necessarily, it's not a great long-term strategy. We don't ideally want that individual chewing on their shirt for the rest of their life. But certainly it is better, right? Our approach is often, what's the lesser of the evils here, right? And certainly chewing on your shirt or chewing on jewelry is a lot better than biting yourself, right? So often we absolutely advocate for things like that while you're working on building skills. Because again, it's better than the alternative, it's better than actually hurting yourself. So it's like, what can we replace that with temporarily? And what can we replace that with in the long term? Both are valid and important.
All right. So this person's asking about what to do, and this ties in with, and I want to push everyone to do this, watch your OCD presentation, because you did address a lot of what this question's about. But I think you've talked about it's really hard to tease out the difference between OCD and or how it wraps into the self-injury and anxiety and these different things. Yeah. But this person's got a specific sort of issue they're dealing with. Their son, when he gets in the car, has to do this routine every single time where he's hitting his head. And if he's disrupted, then he has to start over. And so they have to do this every time they go somewhere. He has to do this routine. So it's become very ritualized. And they're asking, at this point, now that it's that intense, where do you start with that?
Yeah, that's rough. So every single time he gets in the car, he has to hit his head in a certain way or a certain number of times, you're saying? That's his ritual?
Yeah, for a certain amount of time.
Right. Okay. And again, who can say, is that a ritual in OCD, or is that just the kind of repetitive behavior you see in autism? It can be hard to tell. The way you would diagnose it, as a professional is by saying, okay, does that him hitting his head reduce some sort of obsession or distress? If so, it's related to OCD. If it's more just sort of something they enjoy doing, that would be more characteristic of autism. That said, when an individual can't talk, especially, or is minimally verbal, that can be impossible to tease apart. So it can be a real kind of moot point, if you will. But regardless, so that is really tricky. So I think, obviously you have to, if the individual is hurting himself, you have to figure out how you can interrupt it. The first thing I'll say is what, I would try to do a functional assessment. So what is happening right after the kid does that, or adult, whoever he is, after he is hitting his head when he gets in the car, how are the parents responding? Because it could be that he, quote, has to do that it's a ritual. But sometimes we are unaware of the way we are also contributing to it in the environment. So it could be that, again, I don't know, but certainly I know as a parent, I would be like, stop that, don't do that, or trying to get him to stop in some way. So it could be that attention is also keeping it going, right? If so, I would look if there is something else we could provide. If we could provide him with tons of attention, let's assume it's attention, for example, if we could provide him with tons of attention as soon as he gets in the car for, again, not doing it or engaging in something else, engaging in some sort of replacement behavior. The other thing you could do, again, that's assuming it's a function. Maybe the function of him doing that is to escape something else, right? Like, again, it could be that he's escaping his own internal anxiety as an OCD when he does that, but there could be something else he's escaping on. Maybe he gets in the car and starts doing that, and they turn off the motor or delay their trip a little bit longer. And maybe he doesn't, I'm just making this up because I've seen this with some kids, maybe he doesn't want to go on the trip. Maybe he doesn't want to go on the car ride. So he's learned, okay, when I self-injure, I delay this trip, or they turn off the motor and they wait a little bit longer to go. So again, I would look really, really carefully, take some data first at what are the consequences, what are the antecedents, and what are the consequences every single time this individual does start to engage in this kind of hitting himself ritual. What happens right after? Does he get attention? Does something stop? Does he delay the trip? And whatever that consequence is has to be changed immediately, okay? So again, if you notice you are, again, delaying the trip every time he does that, don't do that, obviously. Start driving right away. You want to change those consequences. But you also want to, again, try to see if there's some replacement you could teach him that is in any way incompatible with that, or anything to even somehow interfere with that. So he's hitting his head, you said. I'm just wondering, again, I don't love helmets, I don't love gloves or mittens or anything like that, but just anything to somehow even interfere with that ritual in the meantime or reduce the impact of it so that if he is hitting himself, he's not hurting himself as much in the meantime. The other thing you could try to do is introduce something highly, highly, highly positive for this individual. So let's say, I don't know if he has a favorite song he listens to or a favorite DVD he could watch on an iPad in the car, but introducing that only on car rides, because it sounds like he only hits his head as soon as he gets in the car. So I would say introducing that as soon as he gets in the car. But as soon as he starts hitting himself, he would stop the video or stop the music, so that he would learn, okay, I only get this favorite video or I only get this favorite music when I'm in the car and I'm not hitting myself. That's something that has certainly worked with other individuals, something you could try. But in general, you want to try to figure out, is there some sort of replacement we could teach him? And or how could we is there something incompatible we could teach him to do in place of that? Or is there some way we could reinforce him for not doing that? Something else I've done with individuals whose level of cognitive understanding is, but if you think it could be too hard to just say like, okay, you get to watch this video, you get to listen to the song if you don't hit your head at all. With some individuals, they can understand a gradual reduction approach, right? So let's say, I'm making this up, he hits his head 10 times when he gets in the car. You could teach him, okay, we will watch this video, your favorite video here, if you only hit your head 9 times. And the next day, okay, you watch your favorite video if you only hit your head 8 times. And the next day, okay, you watch your favorite video if you only hit your head 7 times. You get the idea. So one approach is, again, the first approach I was describing is what we would call like differential reinforcement of other behavior, and that basically you're reinforcing him for the absence of self-injury. He could get reinforced if he's doing anything other than hitting his head. But then the second approach I was describing is what we call differential reinforcement of lower rates of behavior, DRL, where you're reinforcing him for lower rates of the behavior if he can hit his head less times each day, if that makes sense. So again, I don't know that would work with every individual, but that has worked with some people. Does that make sense?
Yes. The next question is a sort of a combo. I've gotten several questions ahead of the webinar, and then I just got another one from someone who's listening live. So I'm going to put a couple questions together here. These parents are asking about the word no, because the truth is they've learned not to use it, but other people use the word no. So and it is their child's trigger, the word no. And this one parent wrote me and said, Grandma refuses to accept that she's not allowed to say no. So the power struggle is on multiple levels. So I don't think you can solve that problem, but it just may be some coping strategies for parents. Or how do they deal with this in public when somebody says no to their child and it triggers, this sort of event?
Well, I will say the word no is a trigger word, or can be a trigger word for all kids, for sure. Certainly a trigger word for my own children, for my own 5-year-old. My 6-month-old right now is too little for it to be a trigger, thankfully. But, a lot of children, the word no is a huge trigger for them. And so it sounds like there's like a few components to the question you were asking. So let me unpack them. The first one is what to do when no is a trigger. But then the second issue is how do we get people in their lives to stop using the word no? That might not be possible. For sure. You can't control strangers on the street, obviously. And you can't control your kids' teachers, probably. And I certainly know I cannot control my mother or mother-in-law at all. So you may not be able to affect, again, their grandparents, the other people in their life. But one thing you can try to sell them on is that we're not saying that you can't deny the child anything, but perhaps without using the word no, right? So what I mean by that is it is much better to present the child with what they can do than telling them what they can't do. So I'm thinking of a child who he ate at KFC every single night, and we were trying to break him of eating at KFC, okay? So we initially, I think parents were okay with fast food in general, but we're giving him the choice of, let's say, Boston Market and Subway. So every night when that child would say, at first, I want KFC, you wouldn't say no KFC. We would just say, your choice is Boston Market or Subway, right? So you're essentially saying no KFC, but you can do so while presenting the choice of what they can choose between without actively having to say no. The no is almost like a throwing it in your face. It's like adding injury to, what's the expression? Adding something to injury. What is that expression? You know what I'm saying? Adding insult to injury. There we go. The no is like, why do you need to say that, right? Like it's just, again, emphasizing to the kid that they can't have that. So instead of saying no KFC, you would just say, well, do you want Subway or Boston Market? That's your choice, right? Same thing I'm thinking of when I worked at Bellevue on the inpatient unit. There was a kid who would always want to watch Michael Jackson. So often the staff would be like, the kid would just be like, Michael Jackson, and they'd be like, no Michael Jackson. And as soon as he'd say no Michael Jackson, he'd start hitting himself, So again, there's no need to say no Michael Jackson. Instead, you could say to the child, you will get Michael Jackson after you do this assignment, or you will get Michael Jackson after you shower, or you will get Michael Jackson after you go to the bathroom. So telling the child when they will be able to get these things. Again, it's the same as no, you can't have it right now, but no, you can't have it right now is like a hopeless statement, right? Like instead you want to give them the sense of when they can have what it is they want, what they need to do to get what it is they want, or choices between what else they can get instead. Does that make sense? So it's a much, much better approach overall. And sometimes if you can sell caretakers on that, it helps. Because again, I'm thinking of grandparents, certainly in-laws, often they'll be things like, you're spoiling the child. What do you mean I can't tell them no? So instead of just saying to them, we don't use the word no with our child, saying, of course we deny him things that he may want, but that doesn't necessarily have to be associated with the word no, which we know has become a trigger over time. Does that make sense?
Yes, and the other side of that question, or the other part that I kind of squished together there, was parents dealing with this in public? Like how, when this happens and they see it unfold, sort of in real time or in slow motion, what are some coping mechanisms parents might use? Or have you seen parents learn how to cope with that effectively?
Mm-hmm. When they see it unfolding in public, I mean, often, I hate to say it, but the approach with most things is more of a prevention approach. Once a child is in full meltdown mode and hitting themselves and freaking out and tantruming, there's very little you can do other than try to stay as calm as possible and get it and wait for it to kind of subside or peter out, just like a horrible thunderstorm. Like you need to kind of wait for it to end and protect yourself and protect that child to whatever extent you can. So the better approach is really trying to, again, minimize it beforehand to whatever extent you can. Okay. So I realize that can be hard to do. Life moves quickly. I don't succeed in it myself a lot, right? But again, if you see your child ask for something, I don't know, I'm just giving an example, you're out and they're like, I want candy. And you see someone else say to them, no candy. You can very quickly, before they start self-injuring in that moment, intervene and again, offer the replacement. So say, you can have this or this instead right now, or we will have candy, tell them when they are going to have it, right? We will have candy tonight after dinner, but right now you can have this or that. So you can very quickly try to kind of intervene in the moment, again, before they start freaking out. Again, like I said, once a child kind of really, really starts freaking out, it can be much harder to stop unless there's kind of specific songs or phrases that might calm that child down. Like with one kid, I'm thinking of Zippity Doo Dah, like when he would start self-injuring or tantruming, and he'd sing Zippity Doo Dah would kind of calm him down. But again, it's not a great long-term strategy because you don't want that child to learn, oh, whenever I start hitting myself or hurting someone will sing Zippity Doo Dah to me, which I love. Like ideally, again, you want to teach them to ask for that in an appropriate way without, again, self-injuring. But in an emergency situation, if there's something, they love that could calm them or comfort them, it might be okay to do that. But again, your better approach is try to prevent it. So as soon as you see someone else kind of use the word no, intervening right then to kind of offer some alternative. And I don't know, I'd be happy to send this to the listeners, but there's a really cool study I assigned to my students actually by Charles Mace. It's a 2011 study on 3 methods of saying no, on kind of how to deal with that. So alternative methods for saying no to individuals with autism. And so one of the methods included, I'm just reading this because I think it's so interesting, denying computer access while providing an opportunity to engage in alternative preferred activities. So that's what I was saying. So instead of just saying no computer, right, we wouldn't do that on our life. A child would, I want a computer, you would just say no computer. But you would say, like, if the child's saying, I want a computer, you could say, you could watch TV or read a book right now. So again, you're presenting those two an alternative preferred activity or 2. I would do probably 2 alternative preferred activities. And another thing you could do is, so another situation, another, again, method they have is denying the immediate computer access by arranging a contingency between completion of a low preference task and subsequent computer access. So again, instead of just saying, the child's like, I want computer. Instead of just saying no computer, you would say, okay, first, what I do with my daughter, first finish your homework and then you could have computer. Or first eat this chicken finger and then you could have computer. Or first do this puzzle, then you could have computer. So again, you are delaying that thing they want instead of telling them no, or telling them what it is they need to do to get that thing. So the no with an explanation plus alternative condition would look like this. When Philip, the child with autism, would request a computer, for example, instead of saying no, you can't have computer, he would say, I'm sorry you can't play now. Professor Mace is doing his work on the computer, but I'd be happy to play football with you outside instead. So again, that's offering an alternative to the computer that the kid likes, playing football, to kind of soften the blow. If it were me, I would actually do that same thing without saying you can't play on the computer now. I wouldn't say, although it sounds like for some kids the word no, only no is the trigger, so saying you can't do X now wouldn't have the same effect. But I would just say, I'd be happy to play football with you outside, or if it were me, I'd probably offer a choice between 2 things. You can't play computer right now if you're going to say that, but I'd be happy to play football with you or play soccer with you, like 2 things the kid likes, and letting them choose, because we also know that choice is a very powerful motivator that kind of takes the edge off of anything bad, okay? And then the other thing they did was the yes with a contingency. So instead of saying, no, you can't play computer, so sure you can play computer now just as soon as you finish the schoolwork first. So that kind of thing. Okay.
Okay. This is a question from a colleague at your level. This person's asking, she has a client who's engaged in self-injurious behavior since age 4. The behavior is hand biting, lots of scarring and scabbing, arm biting, bruises, and head hitting. He is now 11. He has various other medical issues. He is nonverbal and engages in the behavior between 75 and 180 times per 4-hour session. They conducted a FA and the results were higher in all areas, highest in alone, high in demand, attention, and access, and lowest in play. A response block was used in the past, and biting moved to other parts of the body.
And what that means, a functional analysis, what that means is that this kid is injuring himself most when he's by himself, when no one else is there, which usually does suggest a stronger sensory function, that he's not necessarily doing it for attention or to escape something, because he's doing it even when he's by himself, right? Like if I was biting my nails in a room all by myself and no one else is there, it would suggest that I was doing something that in some way feels good to me, either increases or reduces my level of arousal or helps me internally in some way.
He says, do you have any other sensory extinction recommendations in combination with SR plus DRO? What punishment procedures do you recommend?
That means positive reinforcement alone has been ineffective. So in addition to it being highest in the alone condition, what other conditions did they say it was high in?
Play was the lowest. So it was highest in alone. It was high in demand, attention, and access, and lowest in play.
So it does suggest it does serve multiple functions. Have they tried any sort of functional communication training with this individual that wouldn't help with the sensory aspect of it in terms of the automatic aspect of it? But again, it sounds like there's some element of attention and escaping demands too. So I wonder if they've taught this individual or tried teaching this individual any alternative forms of communication to get attention or escape demands. There's also an article on the treatment of multiply controlled self-injury that, self-injury that serves multiple functions. But I think, it can be very, very challenging. Like I said, when it's automatic, when it's occurring that frequently. I've never personally used a punishment approach. But it could be several things. It could be that have they tried more of a non-contingent reinforcement approach? It sounds like they've used, you said DRO, which means trying to differentially reinforce the absence of the behavior. Sometimes DRO doesn't work very well, so something else they could try if they haven't already is non-contingent reinforcement. So again, presenting the individual ideally, with the same type of reinforcement. Again, I'm not 100% sure what the function is. It sounds like the main function is automatic, although it can serve other functions as well if it's high in those multiple areas. But again, presenting the individual with some sort of reinforcement non-contingently without them having to do anything to ask for it at very high rates. I don't know if they've tried that approach. And again, that's most effective when the reinforcer is matched to the function, but that's obviously harder to do when the main function is automatic. So again, sometimes it can even be successful with just other reinforcers, where again, you're giving them very, very frequent reinforcement at a very high level, at a higher level than their engaging in self-injury, non-contingently, again, without them having to do anything, to almost kind of have a kind of satiation on reinforcement effect, again, which is often predicated on it being the same reinforcer. So again, I don't know if that's something you've tried, but they certainly can. DROs are certainly most commonly, I would say, used with automatic multiply controlled self-injury, but they certainly can try a non-contingent reinforcement approach. And like I said, if they haven't tried any sort of functional communication training, I would definitely try that. Have they tried kind of anything? I don't know what they've tried in terms of to compete with that. What was the form of self-injury? You said biting or hitting? I forget what you said already.
Well, she just added a little more to her question. She said they started manned training for access, PECs, and an array of tree.
Okay.
He's making progress with that, but he has no form of communication prior to that.
Okay, so it sounds like the art that what they mean by man training is they're teaching him some sort of communication, it sounds like already, which is good. So they've started teaching him to ask for things, and that seems to be having some effect, you're saying, but it's not completely working because it sounds like there's an automatic function to his self-injury as well. Correct? Yeah.
Right, and he's 11, and she said it was hand biting and head hitting.
Hand biting, head hitting. And have they tried incompatible behavior? Teaching him physically incompatible? I'm sorry, I don't know if this response. Have they tried teaching him behaviors that are physically incompatible with the hand biting?
She says he will still engage in the behavior when he has the access. So, yeah, they tried to do a block on his hand to try to prevent it, just to protect him. But that actually aggravated him because he didn't like the Velcro. And so, yeah.
Oh, no.
Sounds like they've had
a
lot of difficulty. But it sounds like it started when he was 4, so it's been going on for 7 years.
Yeah, that sounds so rough. What about even like putting some sort of cream or thing on his hand that he doesn't like the taste of? I mean, that could aggravate him as well, obviously. I'm trying to think, jewelry on there, rings, gloves, I don't know, just something that maybe wouldn't aggravate him as much, but would, you're right, block it a bit. That is so challenging. That does sound like it's a really, really challenging case when it's been that chronic and long-standing.
Okay, got time for just a couple more. This next one is from another practitioner. He's saying that they have a client who is, every time they do functional analysis, and they'll figure out the trigger, and they'll think they have the clue, the key, and then he'll change it. So the trigger will change to something else almost immediately. So it's like just solving another puzzle. So it sounds like the child's in a good situation. He's got appropriate attention at home. So they're finding the thing that is most effective is to actually take away stimulus, leave him alone, and that de-escalates it. But he seems to be testing everybody all the time, and the episodes seem to happen instantly. So he's fine, and then all of a sudden he's full tantrum.
Okay. I may not be understanding this, so just correct me if I'm not, but it sounds like what they've done is try to assess the triggers a lot, which is good, which is one step to try to assess what's coming right before the self-injury. But the more important thing than assessing what comes before it is assessing what comes after it, what the consequences are. We only know what the function of self-injury or any behavior is by looking at what the consequences for it are, right? So like I said, minimizing the triggers tends to be more of a short-term solution. Like the example I was giving earlier, like if a kid is sitting next to another kid and you realize that they tend to self-injure more when they're sitting next to other kid, of course it can help reduce it in the moment if you move away from that kid, right? But those tend to be temporary short-term fixes, like I said. So then you're left doing what these people are doing in terms of you're playing whack-a-mole, right? You're kind of jumping from trigger to trigger to trigger. So again, eliminating or reducing triggers can be a very short-term temporary strategy and can be part of the solution, but it shouldn't be your main solution. The main solution is looking at what the consequence is. What is the individual getting out of it? That's how we know what the function is, right? And we want to try to help them get that need met in a better way. So I don't know, again, if I'm understanding this correctly, but what it sounds like to me is that, again, this individual may have learned that whenever they engage in self-injury, people leave them alone. People leave him alone, right? Suggesting the function of his self-injury is to avoid or escape social interaction. So again, I'm not faulting the family or the caretakers because, again, we would all fall into that pattern. I would do anything to get my kid to stop hurting himself. I think it was the first example I gave in this webinar where when I met that client a long time ago, I met this kid with autism. As soon as I walked in, they said, "Say hi to Lauren." As soon as the kid started biting himself, the dad's like, "Oh, let's just leave him alone." Okay, let's leave him alone. And we walked away and the kid stopped biting himself. So again, that kid learns when I bite myself, everyone leaves me alone, right? That is not a lesson we ever want kids to learn. Does that make sense? And again, I see how we could fall into that pattern. I would fall into the same pattern easily, even while knowing all I know, because you just so want your kid to stop hurting themselves. You would do anything to make that happen, right? But ideally, what you want is, again, so it sounds like they found that what de-escalates him is they leave him alone, I think you said. So again, what we want to do is teach this individual, teach this boy or man, I forget how old you said he is, to say, leave me alone, either verbally, or again, we've done this with just micro switch buttons where they press a button and it says, leave me alone, or I need a break, or go away, or I want some privacy, whatever it is. So that this individual has another way to get people to back off and leave him the hell alone other than resorting to biting himself. Does that make sense? That is the most important thing you could do, figuring out what is the consequence that is maintaining this person's behavior, and how can they get that same consequence? How can they get their needs met in that same way for engaging in appropriate behavior rather than having to resort to self-injury to get their needs met? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I think people tend to do that most often when they're doing FBAs, identify the triggers, but sometimes they do that more than identifying the consequences, and the consequences are the key part.
Okay. All right. So the next one, and I know we're almost done. I know we're almost out of time, but this person has a client who has Down syndrome and Down syndrome and autism. And so, have you worked with kids with those comorbidities at all?
Back when I was on a longitudinal study assessment study, I think I worked with one kid with Down syndrome, also autism, but no, for treatment purposes, I have not. Okay. But I don't think that I know that would change the intervention approach too much. Okay, so anyway, same types of interventions. Right. So she has a kiddo with both Downs and autism who's 10, and she's been having a really hard time getting his self-injury to his face under control. They've used ABA for about 2.5 years and have tried all sorts of strategies. They've done ignoring preferred toys, giving attention, edibles, putting gloves on, trying to block from hitting, keeping his hands busy, moving to a different area. They've done a functional analysis and found that there was not a set time that he would hit more. He could be on the bus, he could be overstimulated, he could be bored, tons of attention, didn't seem to matter. Parents have done thorough medical checks, and he's getting bigger, and now they're starting to worry. So I know this is similar to a lot of the questions we've asked. But in that situation where they just seem to have run out of arrows in their quiver, how do you get a sort of fresh perspective and start over? Yeah. Well, yeah, that is hard. I mean, I think when it's happening, like you said, across the board like that in response to usually when I first interview parents or teachers, they say the behavior is happening all the time. I will say that. But when you do take data, you do start to realize that it's not happening all the time, that it is more likely to happen in certain situations than others. That said, it sounds like this family has already taken data. So maybe they've already gone down that path. If they haven't, I would suggest doing so. And even if they have already, but it was a year ago or a month ago, I would do it again because things can change very quickly in a month. So I would start keeping data before anything to really get a sense of what situations it's more likely in. But even more important than the triggers and situations, like I said, what are the consequences? Because I think what I didn't get a sense from in that, it sounds like a functional analysis had been done, and those are, if it was a true functional analysis, those are often very contrived and experimental situations. So it could also really help to take some good ABC data in his environment and look at, in his natural environment, are there any consequences that typically follow his self-injury? Like, is the bus driver yelling at him or giving him attention? Is he getting something he needs or wants after that? And again, figuring out how we could alter that. If it truly is completely automatic, like he's just getting some sort of sensory need met, is there some sort of physically incompatible behavior we could teach him, like I was saying? And it could just be that the reinforcers identified for refraining from self-injury or engaging in lower rates of self-injury maybe aren't powerful enough. So is there something this individual really, 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 really loves that he can get contingent upon or play with or use or listen to music, contingent upon not engaging in that kind of self-injury, at least in specific situations? I feel like there's some other element to the case that I'm forgetting or leaving out.
I think you would.
But in general, okay. Is there some other way they can kind of help me, even if it's that sensory need, like if it's a reduced, like if, let's say, again, very often things aren't only sensory or automatic, even when people think they are, but let's assume they are. if his self-injury is somehow increasing his level of arousal, are there other things we could do instead? Could we introduce exercise into his life? Could we reintroduce sort of a lot of physical movement? Or if it's the reverse, again, if it's to kind of bring down his level of arousal, what else can we teach him to bring down his level of arousal, such as relaxation, deep breathing? There's an intervention called Soles of the Feet, which is a kind of mindfulness-based intervention that individuals with intellectual disability have been able to taught to do. When they're feeling distressed, for example, they redirect attention towards those soles of their feet. So are there other things we can kind of teach them to do to calm themselves down if the function of their self-injury is in some way to reduce their level of anxiety or arousal?